Sleep researcher and child psychologist Sarah Blunden says sleep is one of the most challenging issues parents face, whether it's unsettled babies, toddlers changing sleep patterns, and then there are the teenage years and young lives dominated by screen use. Dr. Blunden is the founder of the Australian Centre for Education and Sleep. She also directs the Paediatric Sleep Clinic based in Adelaide. She's with us now. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, Catherine, and how are you? I hope you had a good sleep.
I did have a pretty good sleep last night. I'm just thinking it's just after 7 a.m. Is this a bit early to be starting work for a good sleep pattern?
It's funny you say that, but I was thinking to myself I have to get up very early to do this interview, and that's probably not so great for sleep patterns. But, you know, we can handle a couple of early nights or a couple of late nights, early mornings or late nights. But when it's a regular thing, that's not so great.
It's patterns and habits that matter. Mine was a bit tossy-turny last night with the heat, but I don't mind as long as I can get back to sleep. What does a normal night's sleep, a brilliant night's sleep look like?
The components of a really good sleep include the correct sleep duration per person, and that's very, very individual. For adults, that ranges between 7 and 9 hours a night. So that's already 2 hours difference between person 1 and person 2. In children, particularly younger children, that can range from, for example, a toddler between 9 and 14 hours in a 24-hour period as to how much sleep we think they should need. That's because of the great individual needs. So it's really hard to know how much sleep you actually need. But I think we all have a bit of an idea as adults how much we would like. So there's the quantity, there's the quality. So that means, as you were mentioning about the heat, not waking up so much overnight, kind of not having a restless night is really important. Also, one of the most important things, as you mentioned, is that we need to keep a regular sleep-wake schedule. So if we have a very late night morning, late night Monday night, an early night Tuesday night, another late night Wednesday and Thursday, and they vary a lot, it's very hard for our circadian rhythm, which is our in-out body clock, to understand what's going on. So it really likes it when it's settled. So those two things, sleep quantity and quality, are really important, and they're probably the two most important components of a good sleep.
Also, that question, I'm interested how this varies between children and adults. No one goes to sleep and sleeps like a log for 8 hours, right? Like you're probably exhausted if that's the case. What's normal about wakefulness and the sensation of being a little bit dreamy and awake as opposed to out to it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think there's a big myth in the community about the fact that we do, in inverted commas, sleep through the night without waking. We can't possibly do that. Every sleep cycle, which ranges from about 45 minutes all the way through in a child to 90 minutes in an adult, at the end of each sleep cycle we do have an REM period, which is a dream period. It's very light sleep, and we always wake up from that. Now, as a young child, we might wake up and actually be alert, maybe call for parent. As an adult, we might have what we call a micro-arousal, or we might actually wake up, go to the loo, have a drink. But we can't possibly sleep through the night without actually waking. So some of us are more prone to wake and stay awake, depending on how light our sleep is. And we now know that sleep is a genetic predisposition. So some people are lighter sleepers. That is, they'll wake up and stay awake for longer after those REM periods. And some of us don't. So we perceive that we don't wake up, but we in fact do. So it really depends on the person, Catherine, I think.
For child or for adult, how can this be something you manage well if you're a light sleeper? As you mentioned, I just said, I don't mind waking up as long as I go back to sleep within a reasonable period of time. When you wake up and you're like, bing, for hours, that becomes stressful.
It does.
So how can you help, as best you can, work with your genetics over how heavily you sleep?
That's a good idea. So we have behaviours around sleep that will help to promote sleep. Now, we need to have a darkish environment. I don't think that in young children complete darkness is helpful, because they kind of get fearful of the dark. But a darkish environment so that our body gets the strong cue that it is sleep. And we have to be cool enough or hot enough and all those things. So as you mentioned, when it's really hot weather, we have to keep ourselves cool, because we have to drop our body temperature by 0.5 degree to be able to get to sleep, which may not seem a lot, but actually 0.5 degree is quite a lot. So the external temperature and external environment is important. But let's also consider the fact that when you wake up and, as you say, you ding in the middle of the night, it's often because our brain starts working really hard and we have things on our minds, and we can't kind of switch off. So one of the most common therapies, if you like, for that problem is don't try and lie in bed and try and stay asleep and try and get back to sleep, because the more you try, the more you're probably going to stress about trying. And that can turn into actually quite a difficult insomnia. So we often suggest perhaps wake up, perhaps don't even try and sleep, take the stress off, lie there, do a bit of reading perhaps, do something that's going to make you sleepy again, and then you'll go back to sleep. You will most likely go back to sleep. It might just take a little bit of time. And if that becomes a problem, then you might want to seek some input from a health professional. Most of us will be able to get back to sleep if it's overnight, because our natural human body clock dictates that we must sleep overnight. So we still haven't finished sleeping. Just a question, I guess, of not stressing too much about it.
Let's look at some of the immediate situations people might be facing, and you alluded to it. We're often out of whack with habits at this time of year. We've been on holiday, perhaps, I don't know, playing cards or whatever till the middle of the night, or kids have been allowed to stay up late. And you're trying to get back into that routine, a bit of excitement about going back to school. What are some of the ways of restoring your post-holiday habits well? Okay,
so we know that it's easy to drift into a late sleep pattern, later nights, later sleep-ins in the morning, and that's because our body does have a natural tendency to sleep longer than the 24-hour period. Our 24-hour clock, if you like, is sometimes, in some people, 24.7 hours, some people, some 24.4 hours. So we have a natural tendency to shift forward. So unless we stop that from happening, it will shift forward. So let's just say that we've got someone who's going to sleep at 10 o'clock and waking up at 9 o'clock in the morning during the holidays. We have to shift the morning wake-up time maybe a quarter of an hour every couple of days. So they make sure that they wake up at, let's say, 9:15, then 8:30, then 8:15, then 8 o'clock, and then 7:45. And we do the same thing for bedtime, so that we are shifting the body clock bit by bit. We do that by exposing to strong light in the mornings. Now, I don't know about you in New Zealand, but certainly in Adelaide we have very strong and hot light at the moment. So it's really helpful to help our young people to get their body clocks retimed to the school clock. When we wake up in the morning and we get exposed to light, our innate body clock, which is triggered by melatonin, goes back into alert mode when we expose ourselves to light. So if we're alert at 9:15, then we might be alert at 8:30, then we'll be alert at 7:45, 8:15, etc., until such time as we've shifted our body clock slowly back. That might seem, slow and laborious, but our body clocks are slow to shift. They can't shift very quickly. If we were, for example, to say, day one you wake up at 9 o'clock and day two you wake up at 7 o'clock, that's fine, but your body clock at night time won't shift that fast and you'll just be out of whack and lose your sleep. So it's a slow process. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Let's run through the life cycle. You said before earlier with babies and infants, a huge range in their 24-hour sleep needs between 9 and 14 hours. And how can that break down, by the way? What can be normal for baby, unfortunately might be challenging for the parents, but what's the range of sleep patterns that are perfectly normal for a baby and an infant?
Yeah, normal is a very tricky word, isn't it? Because so many babies are different to other babies. And I think the vast majority of us would think that a baby would wake up at, 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and they'd have a nap in the morning about 10 o'clock for a couple of hours, and at 1 o'clock for a couple of hours, and they go happy down to sleep at 7 o'clock. Excuse me. But I don't think that that's what is the most commonly believed sleep pattern for babies, but it's actually certainly not what I see in my clinic, not the most common. What I'm seeing is babies that wake up much earlier than 7 o'clock in the morning, then it depends on how long they can stay awake, and that depends on the age. If they can stay awake for about 3 hours, they might go down about 9 o'clock if they wake at 6. Then they might sleep for an hour, they might sleep for 2. As early babies, as young babies, they're probably going to sleep 3 naps a day, and that might be 1 or 2 hours. As they get older, they'll drop to 2 naps a day, and it'll be somewhere in the morning and somewhere in the afternoon, and then they'll drop to 1 nap. So those naps are very individual, and it depends on, 1, how long the child can stay awake for, and 2, how long they actually nap for, and that depends on their capacity to resettle once they wake up after a sleep cycle. So there's a lot of components in children's sleep that are much more tricky than in adult sleep because they can't self-regulate quite as well as we can.
Apart from surviving it, Is there anything parents can do if they're finding their own sleep being impacted, perhaps because they just can't get a long enough stretch?
It is very tricky because in our societies, in both New Zealand and Australia, we don't have the village to take up, to help bring up the child. I think that the best thing to do is to try and go with the baby's sleep patterns. And I think as an early baby, it's very important that we do allow the baby to sleep easily. Sometimes we might fight that as a parent, so we don't want to get into bad habits, for example. So if the baby sleeps in a sling or sleeps in the pram or sleeps in the car or sleeps on the parent, that's helpful because that way the parent can also perhaps have a bit of a nap when they are. I think that it's very stressful in the early months. As the child, after about 3 months of age, starts to develop a circadian rhythm, the parents can actually regulate that a little bit more to be able to understand when the child is sleepy, because there is a rhythm. We just need to kind of find it. And the way that they can do that is they wake the child at the same time in the morning. So if, for example, for the whole week, a baby might wake up at 6 o'clock, 6:30, 5:45, 6:15, 6:45, somewhere around 6:30 that baby is awake. So the parent might say, I'm going to wake up my baby every morning at 6:30. And I hear you say, are you crazy? Wake up a sleeping baby. But that's the only way to actually regulate the cycle, because if we wake up a sleeping baby at 6:30, we know they're going to be sleepy at about 9:30. Therefore, we can kind of calculate, we can put them out at 9:30, and we might be able to get a bit of a nap at 9:30 if we haven't got too much else to do. And then they'll wake up after their sleep period, and the same thing will happen for the afternoon nap because we know how long the baby can stay awake for. That sense of control that a parent might be able to have, at least they might be able to understand a little bit better when their baby sleeps, and therefore how to perhaps catch a cat nap or relax when the baby is going to be asleep. It's when the napping is all over the place that it becomes even more difficult, I think.
Toddlers, they will wake at night, you tell us. Sometimes that's because there's dreams and nightmares happening. It's a case of settling. They'll probably nap less and less as they reach school age. What are the challenges once children are into the pattern of school age? What's a way to prevent what you might dub poor sleep habits happening? What are some of that you see in your clinic, and some of the ways you can help them, as you say, self-regulate?
It is tricky because as the children get older, they're more aware of their environment. They're more aware of the fact that they don't want to sleep by themselves half the time. So a child being fearful, not wanting to sleep alone, that starts to emerge at school age. They're also very able to come out. They're much more mobile. They're much more able to verbalise how they feel. So I think that we move into, as a school-age child, a whole range of other issues that might be deemed psychological, if you like, about how they feel, how they're doing. School will bring a lot of anxieties, perhaps. So we have to kind of deal with that, and it's not just a behavioural thing, because children only do things because of a reason, and there's probably something that's going to click them over into why they're not sleeping so well. The second thing is that we have to really try and help children to be able to sleep by themselves and be self-sufficient. So they'll wake up, they'll need a parent. We try and teach them to be brave, to get their own drink, and to do those kind of things. I think one of the biggest issues that we're all facing as parents and health professionals is the advent of social media and screen time in the bedroom. We know, and I'm sure that you're aware of the increase in use of screens. We know that the use of screens prior to bedtime stimulates the alertness of our body, if you like, because of the light in that screen, the type of light in that screen, and often because of the content of the screen is really exciting. So we know that that screen exposure at bedtime is really poor. It's just the same, if you like, as watching television back in my day, I guess, or reading a really exciting book. If you're excited and aroused in the true sense of the word before bedtime, you're less likely to be calm.
Yeah.
So we have to try and get... Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say the difference, of course, with the screens is that they're designed to be hitting all those dopamine hotspots.
Absolutely.
So is it just a case of whether it's a school-age child or a teen, you've just got to be the boss, really, with discipline around screens? You do. And it is tricky, it's difficult, because often it works really well. That's the hard thing.
But I think everything in moderation sounds exactly like what my grandmother used to say. Because if we can give them a bit of screen time and then get them off the screen to do something other that is calming, younger children particularly, and maybe older children too, want to talk to mum and dad and have a bit of a chat, talk about the day, tell stories, do a bit of listening to music together, cuddling, all that kind of touching, loving stuff can be really, really calming and really good. And, teenagers doing something other than getting on those screens and being excited by that.
We know the school structure's all wrong for teenagers. They typically need to rise later, don't they? We get them up too early. There's nothing much you can miraculously do about that other than what some schools are doing independently. But again, if you look at anyone who's struggling sleep-wise, what's your top advice? The sleep hygiene, as you mentioned, helping the circadian rhythm, dulling the lights in the evening, blackout curtains if you need them. Diet's a factor, isn't it, when you eat? What's your top tips for someone who says, look, I'm never going to sleep well, and you've mentioned genes are a factor. What's the best you can do to get the best you can?
Yeah, right. So we've covered, as an adult you're talking about, I guess being aware of what you're eating, exactly, spicy, salty food before bedtime, giving yourself about 3 hours to digest is a really good thing. Interesting that doesn't happen in children. They don't need that long to digest before they go to sleep, fortunately. Be careful of caffeine and alcohol and even drugs any type of drug can disrupt your sleep pattern. Trying to keep that environment correct. Thinking about that not only your body needs to be calm, but your mind needs to be calm. So if we have worries and stresses, and don't we all, then we need to kind of work through that and find times in the day when we deal with that. It's interesting because at bedtime, when we're lying in bed trying to sleep, our mind is, in inverted commas, empty, and it has lots of space for all those worries to come flooding in. So it's an important strategy to be able to do that. I think one of the most important things is to prioritise sleep. We are very busy. We do all have things to do. But really, if we don't get good sleep, we're not going to get good anything, because sleep is the foundation of all health, both physical and mental. And so we should prioritise the fact that we need good sleep, in inverted commas. And I think it's important to understand that we are fairly resilient too. Those of us who have really, really, really poor sleep problems need some assistance, but we are pretty resilient to the day in, day out kind of day.
Just very, very quickly, the listener asking, are sleep supplements a good idea? Are there any that work?
There is some evidence to support that they do. There is not enough to be promoted in the sleep research community, but I think that they may help you, providing they're not going to hurt you and they're not going to interact with other drugs, but they can also make you feel calm. It can also often be a placebo effect.
The placebo, go it.
Yes.
I had a doctor say once, if only I could bottle the placebo effect.
Wouldn't that be true?
Yeah. Thanks very much, Sarah. I'll let you go and have your nap. Thank you, Sarah Blunden.
Thank you very much.
Founder of the Australian Centre for Education and Sleep, also directs the Paediatric Sleep Clinic based in Adelaide.